Now, we know that the outdoor is good for us mentally and physically. We know the stoke we get from it. If there are some people who, for whatever reason, whether some of it is unfamiliarity, whether some of it is actually they've had hostile experiences, or they just don't know the ropes to go through, we know how good it is to get outdoor. Why are we not spreading the stoke? Why are we not making it as easy as possible for everybody to share in the beauty and personal growth that getting outdoor is? This is a systemic problem, and we all need to recognize our role in dealing with this, because the output that we all want to see is outdoor spaces that are protected, that are valued, that are invested in. And if we want that to happen, then we all have to have a relationship with it. If people aren't going, then why should they care?
Hey folks, welcome to the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast. I got so excited editing this one, I decided to add some new intro sounds. Find us on Instagram at Ecosystem Member and comment on this episode's post if you can name the bird in the intro or at the end of this episode. Good luck to all of my fellow bird nerds. This episode's guest is the incredible Keme Nzerem, a journalist, presenter, and all-around awesome guy here in the UK who I came across when he emceed the Patagonia Oceans event this past summer. His energy is infectious and his wisdom plentiful, so I was really excited when he agreed to record an episode. Not only is Keme an award-winning journalist, he is also the co-founder of a really important organization called Opening Up the Outdoors, which is a non-for-profit initiative that focuses on the continued inclusion, education, and enjoyment of outdoor spaces by people of the global majority. In this episode, we talk about Keme's work as a journalist, with Opening Up the Outdoors, and as a father helping instill a positive relationship with the outdoors and nature in his children. We also find out that Keme actually learned to ski in Southeast London, and for those listeners who, like me, have lived in Southeast London, you might be scratching your head as to what stop on the tube the slopes are. So make sure to keep listening for the full story. As a reminder, if this episode connects with you, please share it. And if you're really enjoying this podcast, please leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. This really helps people find the show, and it helps me get the most interesting guest possible by boosting the credibility of the show. So on to the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast with Keme Nzerem. Today on the Ecosystem Member Podcast, we have Keme Nzerem, journalist, presenter, filmmaker, and co-founder of Opening Up the Outdoors. Thanks for joining us today, Keme.
Hey, Rick, thanks for inviting me.
We always ask our guests the same question. How do you define and think about your relationship with nature?
You know, it changes, actually. What I want to do is kind of take you back to what I think are my first experiences of nature connection. I grew up in London, but I was born in Zambia, and we ended up on a slightly complicated journey from Zambia to London. And for a while, we lived in Yorkshire, in a very, very beautiful valley. But we didn't have a lot at that time. And my dad was looking for work, so he was living somewhere else. And it was just my mum and me and my sister. And I must have been 6 or 7 years old. One of the things that mum used to do, when I look back on it now, I see this from a parental perspective. She just needed to get out of the house. I don't know how many of you listening are also parents, but sometimes you just need that fresh air. And I remember going on these long, long walks over the hills, and mum would pack sandwiches and a flask of tea. And we'd just go hiking, man. And some part of me hated it because I was having to walk for too long and I was little. But another part of me really, really loved just that experience of being outdoors in the elements. And it was a very pretty place. So when I ended up in London, I think that connection and appreciation with outdoor spaces was actually quite deeply embedded. I was quite a sporty kid and tried everything. And the kind of other part to this story, where it all comes together in a sense, every summer, the local council would put on sports courses for kids, and they were subsidized. So, it was relatively affordable. And I did table tennis and squash and this, that, and the other. And one year, the leaflet came through the door, and it was skiing. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, isn't skiing something rich people do in the mountains? And I'm not entirely sure how they're going to organize this in the well-known alpine destination of southeast London. But the council had teamed up with the army. The army had a very big barracks nearby in Woolwich, and the barracks had a dry ski slope. And so the army instructors took all the local kids and local estates for the same price as tuition for table tennis, like I mentioned, and taught us how to ski. And I fell in love with it. Fast forward a little bit, got a paper round, saved up, went on the school ski trip, which was to Keme in Italy on the other side of Mont Blanc through the tunnel from Chamonix. And everyone who's listening, I'm sure, knows actually the views are way better in Keme than they are in Chamonix. And that was my first experience of real majestic, breathtaking smallness. And it embedded, I think, that early connection that I had experienced in Yorkshire. And when I layer on top of that, the thrill seeker in me, which as a 50-year-old man with very bad knees, I have to really manage. My connection with nature is a combination of knowing that it's good for me. I can breathe in a deep, open way that I can't in the city. That's not to say I don't like culture and films and theatre and the rest of it, but there is something very, very important for me about being in nature, as well as every now and then going a little bit too fast, whether it's on skis or a bike.
Awesome. I love that. I heard you remark in there breathtaking smallness. I think those moments where we're out in these spaces and just realize that there's so much more in the more than human world, it helps us, I think, adjust our perspective on things.
It really does. It's very grounding. I find it quite hard to meditate. I have a lot of noises in my head, and being in vast and deeply contemplative places allows my brain to go somewhere that I know is really, really valuable.
I want to switch a little bit here and talk a little bit about your career. You're an award-winning journalist. You've covered everything from the Grenfell Tower tragedy to Hurricane Katrina. You're also the co-founder of Opening Up the Outdoors, which focuses on the continued inclusion, education, and enjoyment of the outdoors by people of the global majority.
Yeah.
So you've clearly seen a lot of important issues of our time up close. Why focus on inclusion in outdoor spaces?
You know, outdoor for me was always and still is a happy place, right? It's somewhere that I have always drawn great energy and succor from. And in a kind of parallel to my professional world, where I've always been reasonably active in diversity work, my playtime, I never really gave myself time or bandwidth to think about or confront or challenge or want to challenge the fact that I was regularly one of the few Black and brown people on the trail. I'm not sure if that was selfish or it was just because I was so taken up by the Stoke, having a great time with my friends or on my own, that it was just somewhere that I didn't need to go. A lot of that for a lot of people changed during lockdown. And given that it coincided with the kind of global reckoning after George Floyd was murdered and the centering of BLM, it started to be something that I was thinking about. And at that time, I was approached by a very good friend of mine called Phil Young, who is the co-founder of Alto, who has been doing this work for a very, very long time. He was the presenter of the UK's first snowboard TV show. He has spent a lot of his time questioning why there are so few people of color in outdoor sport. He was having conversations with brands in the outdoor community about what they were doing to tackle diversity, to shift the dial, to get more Black and brown folk out there, especially at that time when we were all being prevented from going outdoors because of lockdown. So he asked me if I would be interested in joining forces with him and talking to the outdoor community, mainly brands, around doing something that would be systemic. Because there are opportunities, I think, for grassroots groups to get kit, to get, climbing harnesses and the rest of it, but actually shifting the dial systemically and structurally on the industry, trying to figure out why it is that lots of Black and brown people, global majority, we are very urbanized. Lots of people who look like me don't have the opportunity to enjoy and experience nature in the way that I have We're really, really excited about what we've achieved over the last couple of years. In a nutshell, because there are these semi-existing opportunities to get kit, what we realized was what we really needed to do was find ways to accelerate the work of outdoor change makers, Black and brown outdoor change makers. And what a lot of people who had set up outdoor groups, particularly during lockdown, told us was the thing that limited their ability to get more people on their trips, let's just say it's a climbing group or a hiking group or whatever, was business skills. Lots of people were setting up these groups and they're, perfectly competent professional people, but the skills that one requires to scale a grassroots organization into a going concern, into a business, you have to be taught these skills: governance, IP, legal, branding, marketing, health and safety if you're running events. So we worked with the brands and a really, really interesting training provider based in Brixton called Hatch to set up a training program that would help those grassroots groups grow more quickly and more sustainably. And a whole bunch of other stuff that we do too around research and managing difficult conversations around diversity and outdoor. People are scared of this topic still. And we have set up an online allyship set of commitments and strategies that help brands and organizations who aren't sure how to dive into this conversation. It gives them some scaffolding so that they can base their own structures and strategies with substance. So please have a look at our website, openinguptheoutdoors.com. And if you have a group that you think we might be interested in, if you want some support, please get in touch on the website.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into part of that work you just talked about. There was obviously the shift during lockdown, murder of George Floyd, also the increased prominence of Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And I think before 2021, having been involved in the outdoor community, read the magazines, followed the Instagram accounts, all of that, I think probably even myself, I a little bit naively questioned the need for an organization that made the outdoors more inclusive. I saw it as my perspective of sometimes you pay to get in a national park or you park at the trailhead or something like that. But beyond that, it didn't feel like immediately exclusive to me. I think now encountering organizations like Opening Up the Outdoors and some of the other work that's been done, I think I have a better understanding of it. But for those people who maybe need, I guess, their aperture opened up a little bit, what is that sort of scaffolding and allyship work that Opening Up the Outdoors is doing to help people understand why this is necessary, why this is valuable in the outdoor space?
I think it's a really common misconception that the outdoors is open to everyone. Certainly, the discussion is different in different parts of the world, but in the UK, historically, the outdoors has been branded and sold as a white experience. And I was quite lucky. I have a white mother, so I grew up with white people. I'm comfortable in white spaces. And I had a young experience that showed me that being in the outdoors was good for me. So all of you who are listening, I want you to close your eyes and put yourself in the shoes of, I'm just going to invent somebody here, a 60-year-old Pakistani immigrant woman, not athletically shaped in the conventional sense, observant as in covers, with no experience of hiking. That person is not gonna see just rocking up to a national park, throwing on hiking boots, heading up the trail with a map, doing it safely. They are not going to have the same experience as a young, fit person who's been doing that all their life. Now, we know that the outdoor is good for us mentally and physically. We know the stoke we get from it. If there are some people who, for whatever reason, whether some of it is unfamiliarity, whether some of it is actually they've had hostile experiences, or they just don't know the ropes to go through, we know how good it is to get outdoor. Why are we not spreading the stoke? Why are we not making it as easy as possible for everybody to share in the beauty and personal growth that getting outdoor is? That's fundamentally the reason for it. And I think, over the last few years, brands have started to do things like putting people of color in their marketing, their advertising. That's a good start. But actually, if you're not following it through with making sure that everybody, all of us are welcome, and jumping in when people are hostile, that you see people, that there is a back end to this. Whenever a brand puts a person of color, luckily it doesn't happen so much, but it has done in the past, whenever in the early days, people of color or non-conventional outdoor types were put in marketing, you get a real kind of flurry of hostility and hate. And brands didn't know what to do about it. So they just left that hostility and toxic language out there, leaving the people that have been put on front covers to deal with it. This is a systemic problem, and we all need to recognize our role in dealing with this, because the output that we all want to see is outdoor spaces that are protected, that are valued, that are invested in. And if we want that to happen, then we all have to have a relationship with it. If people aren't going, then why should they care?
I think it's one theme that keeps coming up through all the different folks that we talk to on the podcast is like, if we don't have a positive relationship in these other ways, like with businesses, with people of all different backgrounds, then how can we really have that good relationship with nature? And it sounds like inclusivity is addressing and acknowledging and embracing how we need to make progress on that issue could also be a way to help us improve our relationship with nature itself.
Absolutely. So, the kind of slightly clumsy epithet that I think is often used is, well, why should a city kid care about a glacier if they've never been to one? There is some truth in that, right? But I think we have to think more cleverly and start with, well, what is the equivalent of the glacier that somebody who is unlikely to visit one for some time, what is their glacier, and how do we really promote those connections? And so there is some amazing work being done with organizations like Flock Together, which is a black and brown bird watching group. Lots of the groups that we have worked with at Alto promote camping and give girls early opportunities to figure out how to camp safely. And of course, we know that for females, particularly females of color, being outdoor on your own, there are many, many layers to that might make it a not comfortable place, from fearing hostility from males, fearing hostility from white males, potentially. Then there's managing periods in a way that works for that individual, where so much of the public discourse is, well, that's difficult. Well, it doesn't need to be difficult. And if you have somebody showing you how to navigate those spaces and have a good time when you're young, then that sets you up for a lifetime of care and engagement. And it means you're much more likely to advocate for the safety and preservation of those spaces. And of course, the big picture here is climate catastrophe and biodiversity loss and habitat damage. None of those things are going to be addressed if we're not in the fight together.
Yeah. Clearly, you're super thoughtful. You've thought about all these different aspects of it. And one that I haven't really had a chance to talk to a guest before about, you're a father. Based on your Instagram, you're seemingly constantly outdoors, biking, skiing, hiking. So how do you think about, with all of that we've just discussed, instilling that positive relationship with nature and the outdoors and outdoor spaces with your children?
Well, I'm very, very lucky to have a wife and friends and kids who appreciate the outdoor in their own way. One of my best friends, her family were from North Wales, from Snowdonia. So for a very, very long time, as a family, we have gone in the summer and spent a couple of weeks in Snowdonia. And it is God's country, man. It is so beautiful. And of course, we've been through the early teenage years when actually they just want to be watching their screens and the rest of it. But they're all water babies, so we're in the sea or the river quite a lot. One big difference between my upbringing and my children's upbringing, they have good wetsuits. Now that is a game changer, man. As I'm sure any parent knows. It means they get out of the water when they're bored, not when they're cold. And in British water, that if you haven't got a wetsuit, you're cold in 2 minutes, right? So look, there's a bit of knowledge and kit that goes with that. It really, really helps if they've got clothing that they feel comfortable in, but also just finding fun things. We've figured out very, very early on that if you want to go on a hike with your children, all your values about chocolate and sweets go out the window. Fill your rucksack with sweets, man, because that is how they're going to get up the hill and back down again happily. the really beautiful thing that I'm so glad both my daughters realized, I think because we were able to show them good times. I didn't insist when they were very young, when it was dreadful weather, that we would hike to the top of the hill, because there's no point, man. It's just miserable. So we would get the wetsuits on and go to there's a beautiful beach near us, which is very safe, but when it's bad weather, you get big waves, but they're safe big waves. So when we get a bad weather day, we know what we're doing. We go to Black Rock Sands because that's where the big waves come in. You can park right on the beach. It's really easy to get in and out. So I think having a bit of knowledge about what works for the conditions gives them a good time. And now they know that being outdoors is good for them. So they will often come home, the kids, and say, you know what, I just need to go for a walk. I just need to clear my head. I just need to be outdoors. And I'm really, really glad that they have found that. And also they understand it intellectually as well as emotionally, so they can ask for it and they recognize the feedback loop.